Hello and welcome to another episode of Legacy Chronicles. My name is Zachary Graulich and I am the Assistant Director of Education here at HMTC, and I am joined today by Holocaust survivor Joe Garten. Joe, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. How are you doing, Zachary?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
I'm doing great.
Great. I'm really glad to have you here today, and we're going to have a really great conversation. So to start, I would love if you could tell me and our listeners when and where you were born.
I was born in Berlin, Germany in 1931 and stayed in Berlin until about 1938. And of course, there was a guy by the name of Hitler who was around, and we were looking to leave the country. Mm-hmm. And we came to the Dutch border, which is near Aachen, and I'm sure you've heard of that. Mm-hmm. And my mother and my sister decided we had to go to the border and into Holland, and that is what we succeeded in doing. Of course, that was without our parents going there. So I was going across the Dutch border. Before we came to the Dutch border, there was a Nazi crossing, a German. They asked me where my father was, because my mother was right there, but she wasn't going with us. They asked me, and so my sister answered to the Nazis, my father is in Berlin. He couldn't get out, and he's in the hospital, and he's sick. But anyway, they let us through after a little bit of conversation. And then we crossed into Holland, and very nicely, there were some Dutch people, and they treated us very well. They gave us a little something to eat, a cookie, and I don't remember what. Just remember, at that time, I was 7 years old. A very brilliant 7-year-old, by the way. No, I'm kidding. So then we came to a camp where this was the beginning of what's known as the Kindertransport, which I'm sure you've heard of it. Mm-hmm. And that was the beginning of what was known as the Kindertransport. But interestingly enough, at that time, nobody heard of the Kindertransport. It sort of wasn't heard about. But of course, there were a lot of children crossing into Holland. So then we were in the camp in Holland. It was like a holding camp. So why was it a hold? Of course, we were headed for England. We were going to England because there weren't too many other countries in Europe taking in anybody. But the English government had decided that they would permit 10,000 Jewish children. Actually, they could have even not been Jewish, but it was 90% Jewish. And we were in this camp waiting to go to England. And my sister and I, and she was, incidentally, she was 5 years older than me. She was much more knowledgeable about where we were at that particular time. And we were in this camp waiting for instructions for the British government to let us into England. And of course, in this camp, there were probably 200 children, some waiting for the same thing that we were waiting, to go to England. At that time, they took about 100 children a day or maybe a week. So interestingly enough, we were there in April. We had crossed the border in 1938 into Holland, and we were there, and every day the guy at the camp, or whoever it was, I really don't know, the guy was in the camp, that today 100 children roughly were going to camp, and we're going to call out the names. So interestingly enough, they came up with the name of me, Joe's Joe. By the way, I was not named Joe there. I'd come from Germany, and the German name for Joe is Josi, H-J-O-S-Y. Anyway, they called my name to go to England. and we were waiting for my sister's name to come up on the transport. Her name did not come up at all. It was just me and probably 100 other children. And interestingly enough, my sister got in touch with my mother, who had gone back to Berlin, and how she communicated with my mother, I really don't know. In those days, there weren't any telephones. There weren't any iPhones. There was no means of transportation or whatever. And if she got a hold of my mother, and my mother said, "Don't let him go without you," I told that to my sister and to the people around me. And my sister said, "Let him go. He's going." So I started my trip to, to London. I've got a little sore throat, I guess, today. And we proceeded to drive or somewhere or other, by bus or whatever, to the place called the Hook of Holland. And that is where all the children departed from that were going to England. It was a port near Rotterdam called the Hook of Holland. So we got on a ferry on the English Channel, probably, maybe it's 40 miles across at that place. And we landed in England at a place called Harwich. Incidentally, while I'm talking of this, all the children on the Kindertransport came through the Hook of Holland and through Harwich. And we were then taken by train to, to London. But before that, we got off the boat, and interestingly enough, I had no shoes on when I got off the boat. Why, I don't know, no idea. It's kind of a stupid thing to do when you're 7 years old. Anyway, they took us to a Jewish hostel, you know what that is, of course. And we stayed there for maybe a couple of days. And then we proceeded to London. And every Kindertransport landed at a place called Liverpool Street Station. And at Liverpool Station, there were probably 50 or 100 people waiting there for us. And they were going to take us, a few children. There were people from England that had decided to accept children. And actually, I was not chosen after arriving at the Liverpool Street Station. And by the way, for future reference, and I'm sure you've heard of it, there is a statue and a memorial from a designer called Frank Meisler, who made a statue of the people, of the kinder arriving at the Liverpool Street Station. Anyway, they picked a lot of other children, a girl, a boy, and various people from England. They did not know us, and we didn't know them. And we didn't speak much English at that time, so it was a little too difficult. But quite frankly, I'm saying now it was a little difficult, but as far as I remember, it wasn't a problem at all. When you're a little kid, you pick up the language, right, of course. Anyway, I was picked up, and we went to a hostel also in London. And we were there in a hostel with all other Jewish children. So in this hostel, of course, we were clothed and we ate. It was fine. There was no problems. But my sister was still in Holland. But in June of 1939, my sister arrived in London. She was taken in by a very, very nice Jewish family, and she lived in the house. So she had a very nice life at that moment. The people very kind to us. I found out she had arrived in London, and don't ask me why. I have a cousin. He was also with me, and we decided to visit my sister in London. Now, I don't know why we walked. We walked about 2 miles to her house. We found our way. Don't know how. We don't know. There wasn't ways at that time either. So that anyway, we got to London, and we got to the house, and my sister opened the door, and as I mentioned to you previously, she saw the two dirtiest two children. They were dirty. The clothes were dirty. Anyway, they fixed us up in this house, and excuse me, and we went back to the hostel. Now this was June of 1939, and we were in. My sister was at that same house. We went back to the hostel. My cousin and I. And the war started on September, of course, when the Germans invaded Poland. And it was decided by the British government that all children should be evacuated, meaning they should be taken out of London because they knew that London was going to be bombed. So they took all these children and distribute them wherever. So my sister and I, we were together now. We got on a bus being evacuated. By the way, evacuated was a nice term, but we were refugees. That wasn't so nice term.
Yeah.
It's just, it's an aside. Anyway, we arrived by bus in a town called Chelmsford, which is 30 miles from London, northwest of London. And we arrived at the bus station in Chelmsford, and waiting at the bus station are local people that are going to pick up the refugees. So we were picked, believe it or not, by a nice couple that were from Chelmsford, living in the best part of town. A very nice house. Just really, we hadn't seen this kind of a house before. Anyway, this lady had a baby, and she was taking care of the baby. But after about 3 months, she decided she couldn't take care of us anymore, and she called the local billeting office, and she told them that you need to take these kids, and to another place because I can't take care of them anymore. And with the billeting office then took us, to a house in the very poorest part of town. There was a widow there. Her name is Mrs. Gunn, Gunn, a name which will be in my life forever. She took in my sister and I. She already had 4 children of her own. And we were there living with these people, Mrs. Gunn, and we were treated wonderfully. They were poor, but there was never a problem with anything. We got along with their children. There was never a question of food, and as you may know, or maybe you don't know, even though there was rationing in England during the war, there was never a time that you could go hungry. Absolutely not. There was everything to eat. I mean, you couldn't have steak or anything like that. You had vegetables and fish, and I lived there, and my sister lived there, and I went to school. And that time I was almost 8. I was 8 that time. No, I was still 7. But anyway, we went to school. My sister went one school. We went to an English school, And I guess that's where we learned our English. We weren't speaking German anymore because there was nobody to speak to. My sister, she could have spoken to me in German, but she didn't. We both learned English, and we stayed there. Now let me backtrack, if you don't mind. Chelmsford, we lay in this poor family, and it was a wonderful life. I was a little kid. My sister was a few years old, 5 years older. And all I remember is everything was wonderful there. And of course, since that time, I've seen and heard and many other Kindertransport children. And most of them were treated very nicely, but some of them weren't.
Right.
And so we were lucky living with these poor people. We had no toilet inside, it was outside. We had no bath, a shower. There was no such thing as a shower. But we took a bath in the kitchen, a little container, whatever it was. And at that time, somehow or other, I met a fellow, really a very nice man who owned a very, very large scrap metal merchant. He was the owner, and he had a secretary. She was out. He lived in this beautiful big house, which I went to because I had decided to apply for a job, and I got the job with this guy. His name is Mr. Driver. He's not here anymore, but he had a very large scrap metal big factory. And the reason that it was scrap metal was very important because every house that had a fence or a metal fence around, they took everything away for the war effort.
Right.
So I got a job with him as an office boy. And believe it or not, they entrusted me to take money to the bank, which was unbelievable. I had a paper route making papers to various houses. They had the number on the plate, take it there.
Yeah.
And I was in his office actually most of the day after school. And after a little while, somehow or other, he had chickens, and these chickens were right next to the house, and I was supposed to feed the chickens. One of my jobs, and I neglected to one day feed the chickens, and he fired me. Imagine fired. I started to cry, and he finally came back to the house where I was living, with the poor people, Mrs. Gunn. And after he saw me cry, and Mrs. Gunn said to him, "You've got to take him back. You can't do that." And he took me back.
Wow.
So I was very happy with that. The next thing I'd like to talk about is I was, of course, Jewish. Mrs. Gunn had never heard of a Jew. This is fairly typical. You know.
Right.
We have horns, but we don't show them, right? Anyway, she took me to church, but she didn't try and convert me, nothing like that, just to take me along to church, and I sang in the church choir. And I really enjoyed it. I can even start singing right now. Anyway, then we were living there. I'm just skipping amount of time until about April. Intern in. I'm trying to collect the month. We were living there until 1943, from 1940 to 43. Now, I was Jewish, and my sister was Jewish, And the people in London who were recording everything we did and everything that happened to me, if they sent money for my shoes, they took care of that. And they had decided that I should leave Chelmsford with these people and go to a Jewish hostel in another town called Ely, E-L-Y. I cried. I said, I'm not going. I'm absolutely not going. I was having this wonderful life, living with these people that I loved.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden to go somewhere like that. Anyway, they finally extracted me. And they sent me to Ely. Why? I guess because I'm Jewish, they thought I was being converted to something else. Anyway, I arrived in Ely, and I hadn't seen a Hebrew book or anything like that. I was going to there, and I was going to have my bar mitzvah. And these were 50 other children, and a rabbi was in this place. He was in charge. And I had my bar mitzvah. I learned my parsha and whatever. And there was a visitor. I had big. It was a wonderful bar mitzvah, like all the ones here. Not quite. Anyway, my sister had gone to London at that time, and she came to visit me for my bar mitzvah, which was very nice.
Yeah.
So that is the story of my life up until the war ended. And by the way, at that time when I was in Ely, I received a scholarship to a very fine school, which is located in another town. And that's where I went. And it was a step above the... and then incidentally, I'd like to tell you, Ely, the Jewish free school, who I'm sure you've heard of it in London, was evacuated to Ely. So initially, I went to the Jewish free school, which was in Ely, which was not all Jewish children, it was all kinds. And then after I got my scholarship, and that's where I went, and then to London when the war was over. Went to London, and I don't know how far you want to go with this.
I think that's a great place to stop for now. And I'd love to talk to you a little bit about your life today, and kind of how you went from being this young boy surviving such difficult times, though for you they seem to be in some ways positive, to now being the man you are today, who speaks to students, goes to schools, and is able to share your story. So if you would, share with me and our listeners, when did you first start to speak publicly about your experiences?
The first time was public speaking. I have a granddaughter. She was going to Columbia Grammar in Manhattan, and they asked me to come and speak about my experience. So that was the first time I went. And even if I have to pat myself on the back, I probably gave a decent informational lecture. It wasn't a lecture, it was a historical thing of my life. And that's when I first started speaking.
And about how long ago was that,
I would say that was, I guess that was 10 years ago, maybe more, more.
Yeah, so you've been speaking for quite some time now.
But of course, not on a regular basis.
Right, of course, but here and there. And so, I'd love to know, as you were, raising a family here in the United States, was the Holocaust something that you would share, regularly with your kids and grandkids, or was it something that really you didn't like speaking about prior to this presentation you gave at your granddaughter's school?
I liked it. I enjoyed it, but let me backtrack a moment.
Sure.
I didn't speak, and you didn't ask about my parents. They eventually left Berlin. They fled across the Belgian border, Belgian border, and they lived in hiding in Belgium for the entire war. Now, how did we know? Interestingly enough, during the war, the Red Cross out of Switzerland, made an effort to get people to write small 25 words messages, and how, I don't know. The letters went to this country, to that country. Eventually, we got those letters, and we knew they were alive. We got those every 6 months, maybe every, like that. So that was my parents. Mm-hmm. And since I'm on the parents, I must tell you, of course, I hadn't seen them and since 1938. And now it's 1945, the war is over. We found our parents in Brussels. And in 1946, we got on a plane from London to Brussels. Never been on a plane before. Most people hadn't been on a plane before at that time anyway. And my parents were waiting for us, my sister and I, at the airport in Brussels. Of course, they saw me. I saw them. They saw my sister. Completely different people.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
But anyway, I was there, and I wasn't speaking German. Mm-hmm. My sister had her German, and she got it back fairly quickly. And however, I stayed with my parents, and after 2 weeks, my entire German came back.
Wow.
It's pretty amazing.
Unbelievable.
The only German I couldn't speak were, if there were scientific things and that all kinds of.
Of course.
But I spoke basic German, and I spoke to my parents, and I was living with my parents on a vacation. They wanted me to come and live in Brussels permanently. I wasn't interested in that. I wasn't interested. I just didn't want to leave England. Mm-hmm. But I saw my parents on a regular basis. So that's going back to my parents.
Right.
Now you ask me how many times I've given this little speech of mine.
Yeah.
I gave it first to my granddaughter in each class. It was either, I think these were 6th graders, is that right? Yeah, 6th and 7th graders, something like that. And then I had, I'm going way ahead of myself. But anyway, that was about 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that was, before that, I had moved to Dallas, Texas. Mm-hmm. What was the reason I was doing in Dallas, Texas? Well, then I have to go back to my father and mother and brother. I had another brother. He didn't go with us. He was separately going. We had arrived. We had decided. We were living in London. I was living in London. My sister was living in London. And my parents were living in Brussels. And my father had registered to come to the United States for a visa. I'm mm-hmm. sure you've heard of that. Mm-hmm. We were on a number, whatever it was. Our number came up. Mm-hmm. We were on the Polish quota, which was a poor quota. It came very slowly. But in 1949, visa, the number came up, and we came to America in 1949 with my parents to this great country of mine. And of course, it is a great, great country. It saved our lives. It saved so many people. There were, of course, a lot of things that didn't go right. Mr. Roosevelt, whatever. But we have to skip over that because that's historical. Anyway, we came to New York, no money. My parents didn't speak English, and this was 1949. Mm-hmm. And we arrived in New York after on a boat called the New Amsterdam. I think there's probably 7 versions of that same mm-hmm. book called New Amsterdam. Anyway, I remember we were landing in New Jersey. And before that, we passed the Statue of Liberty, so everybody went on deck to see to see the Statue of Liberty. Anyway, we were in New York, don't know what we were doing, had no clue. So we decided my father, my brother, and I. Now, you may ask what happened to you. My sister stayed in London, never came to America, except on vacation. And she got married, stayed in London, and never came back permanently, never came to America permanently. So my father, my brother, and I decided we had to do some business. Mm-hmm. And of course, we didn't know the heck we were doing. They had no clue. But we thought that we would go around and buy some material and try to sell it. And we landed in Canal Street, Manhattan, Lower Manhattan, which was the headquarters of the Peace Goods thing. And we rented a little room in a building, I think it was $35 a week, or maybe less. And I told the guy, we'll sign the lease, but we may not be able to keep on. So after a little while, we went around, my brother and I, my father, he didn't speak English. Mm-hmm. Went to separate stores that had their Peace Goods, and we thought we would buy some and then we would sell them. But of course that didn't work out. So my brother and I decided to get a job. So I went to an employment agency, and I got it. I was employed as a picker of merchandise from. The name of the company was Leroy Hosiery. They were They were in 34th Street. I got a job. My brother got a job in some other business. He was making. He had a little experience in manufacturing. Little glove things, really. Anyway, after a while, I'm working there on Leroy Hosiery, and this is now 1950. And my brother was also, so we decided to let my father try out by himself. Somebody had to make some money, it had to be something. I made $30 a week minus the taxes, $27.10. And my brother, so we brought home, when we arrived in the ship, I'll backtrack a little bit now, my brother who had preceded us in America for about a year, so he was here. And, excuse me, let me back. Well, anyway, I got a job in this country. And after a while, there was a draft. I was drafted into the United States Army. Everybody was on draft at that time. And I was sent to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. And after a while, we arrived in Fort Leonard, Missouri, of a train trip from New York. Fort Leonard Wood is in Missouri, southern Missouri, about 200 miles from St. Louis. Anyway, and basic training was due to last for 16 weeks. That's basic training in the Army. And after 8 weeks there, we had to go to the dental clinic to have our teeth examined. It was part of the ritual of the Army. And we were waiting in the room in the clinic to be processed for looking at their teeth. So, and all of a sudden, a guy comes up. He says, "Anybody here have a Jewish, not Jewish, had an education. I'm sorry, they're Jewish. Anyway, I said, looked at this guy, I said, this is a trap. There's no question about it. It's not going to be good. Believe it or not, I stood up. I had gone to college, night school in the City College of New York. I had maybe 2 years of night school, and it wasn't great. But of course, in those days, City College of New York was a prime college. It was the best of the best. Anyway, so I was then. I volunteered with this guy. I was then trained as a dental assistant and was working in the clinic. And after about a month, the colonel who was in charge of he was a dentist, the colonel was in charge of the dental clinic, came and he said, I have a call for people to go to EUCOM. EUCOM was the United States European Command. That was Europe. And he said there's also FECOM. FECOM was the Far East, was the Korean place, because in that time the Korean War had started. So he said, listen, I can send you to FECOM, I can send you to EUCOM. He says, I have a call for EUCOM. He said, I suggest to you go to that, to the EUCOM. And then I was stationed where? Germany. I finally came back. And I was in the United States Army for 2 years in a dental clinic. There were about 20 dentists and 20 assistants. And being in the Army, you might not like it, but being in Europe and not in the war, it was...
Absolutely.
It was a machaya. Do you speak in Yiddish?
Unfortunately, only a bisala.
Okay. Anyway, I was in the Army for 2 years, and I was demobbed, as they say, after 2 years, and arrived back in New York. I had worked for this company, Leroy Hosiery, before I went, and they had contacted me because they stayed in contact, and I did to them. And before I came back from Germany after the end, they offered me a job as being a salesman in Texas and Louisiana and Arkansas. Now, I had come back to New York. I had met this beautiful young lady, my future wife, and in 1955, we were married. And then we had to go and live in Dallas, Texas, because that was where my job was.
Right.
So we got married. I told my wife's parents that we were moving to Dallas. They were in shock a little bit. Anyway, we moved to Dallas. We left New York in a 1955 Chevrolet or whatever it was, and with nothing, just our clothes on our back. But we moved to Dallas, and that is where I lived until 1966 as a salesman in those various states. And I traveled all over, and my wife wasn't quite happy with that, me being awake all that time. And between that time, from 1955 to 1966, my 2 children were born. My first of my daughters, she was born in 1957. My son was born in 1961. And then we decided I'd had enough of traveling. And I told them in New York, I can't do this anymore. Believe it or not, they offered me a job as the sales manager of this company. I had 30 salesmen as employees.
Wow.
And I was fairly successful, but not really. Not financially, a little, not much. But we survived and we lived here. And in 1955, I decided I'm going into business. And I quit, and I borrowed anything from anywhere, even from my brother-in-law at that time from London. I borrowed a little money and started a business, the same business, a sock business, which I had learned. Mm-hmm. This was a sock company. And I made a plan for the business. This is going to be our expenses, this is our revenue and all. And I found a lawyer with the predecessor of the accounting company, the predecessor to, and it's now called, the name escapes me at the moment. And we made a plan. That accountant that I met made a plan, went to the bank, and in those days you could walk into any bank, and they have what's called the back of the bank. You know, there were the loan officers, and they made a decision right on the spot to lend you money if you. So I borrowed some money, and after a while, my business started to pick up and started to be very successful. Believe it or not, I was. If you want to talk about a lucky Jew, Berlin, that was it. And I was in that business until from 1955 until 1972, until I sold the business. And that is my life at the moment. And then I started living, we were living in New York, we moved to Roslyn, Long Island. We had you've heard of these Jewish clubs, right? I'm sure there are plenty of them around here. I joined a club. I never in my life thought I would do anything like that. But we, as I say, we became extremely lucky. Not the wealthiest people in the world, but certainly very comfortable. And then I sold the business, and now I'm here at the Holocaust Center to tell you a little bit, to hear a little bit from you.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's just remarkable that you went from this, as refugee child, during the Holocaust, during World War II, being bounced around from place to place, and then a few, quick decades later, and you've made a life for yourself here in America with your family, and as you said, pretty successful. I think that in itself is so remarkable and shows the ability to survive and thrive, really, despite what you went through as such a young child. So I'd love to know, as you were building your life here in the United States and raising this family, was the Holocaust something that came up in daily conversation? Was it something that your kids always knew that you were a survivor?
The kids definitely knew, absolutely. And the word Holocaust really wasn't spoken that much. Most people didn't know. They didn't know about the camps. Nobody wanted to talk about it. And so the name came up. We were, all my family and knew all about it.
Yeah, and for a lot of survivors, there were some survivors who, after everything, really wanted to speak about it. They wanted to tell people, family, friends, what have you. It was therapeutic to speak about it. And then there are other survivors that, even to this day, don't want to speak about it. It's too painful. Did you find yourself at all, kind of struggling to think about those years? Or it sounds like you had a pretty decently positive experience in comparison to those who might not have. So what was it like for you to talk about your childhood and those memories, maybe when your kids would ask you?
Interestingly enough, I had a very nice life. From 7 years old.
Yeah.
Up and I wasn't deprived of anything. It was great. I didn't have terrible times, absolutely the opposite. So we did talk about, of course, what happened to me, what happened to my sister, But the interesting thing is, now I go back and remind you of Mrs. Gunn, the lady in Chelmsford, the poor lady, who I stayed in touch with all my life until she passed away a little bit. And now I went back to England every year to see them. And it was a whole gathering in there. And they knew what was going on in my life. And they had heard about the Holocaust, maybe a little bit. They know all about that, because if I didn't speak to them dramatically, I spoke to them in telling them what happened. And so that is my life to this day.
Yeah.
A very positive life, as I've told you.
Yeah. And now, as you said, you're here, and to you, this is very important, I know, because we've spoken about it already, that it's important to you and your family that you share your story. And now, by being here and having this conversation with me today, we have an unlimited number of listeners who can now listen to this podcast and learn your story. But I know that you very much enjoy speaking to students and young people. You've done it, as you said, not regularly, but you've done it a number of times over the last 10 years or so. And so I'd love to hear from you, in your words, why is Holocaust education and this type of education so important to you?
Okay. Well, of course, I am a member of the Kindertransport, and they have a branch in Florida, as they have branches other places in the United States. And we had Florida branch, and we had meetings regularly. And so at the beginning, they asked if anybody wants to speak about these schools. Typically, all schools, that's where they were, and I think the middle school, basically. So I said, I'll speak. And I started to speak to some middle schools and told my story, similarly to what I've told here now. And mostly those kids were not Jewish, and they listened carefully. They really did. Every once in a while, somebody else interrupted. But anyway, I enjoyed speaking to them. I did that probably a half a dozen times in there. And I enjoyed speaking to them. Some of them wrote me letters afterwards. And so that's how I came to be a speaker, so-called.
Yes.
And then I came to the Holocaust Center in Glen Cove, and that's where I am right now. And so maybe I will speak to some of these schools around here. I don't know.
We would love to have that happen. And I have to imagine that when you have spoken to these groups in the past, it must be extremely fulfilling being able to share with them your experiences in your life. And as you said, most of these students that you have spoken to in Florida, just like here in New York that we work with at the museum, are not Jewish. Yeah. They don't have any sort of personal connection to this history. Most of them don't really have much knowledge about this history aside from the little bit they found out in school prior to coming here. So I have to imagine that's pretty gratifying for you to be able to address those types of audiences.
100%. No question. No question. It's wonderful that I can speak to them. I'm lucky enough to speak, and it's more lucky for them to listen and to find out what happened to you. And they really ask some good questions.
Absolutely. And as we look to the future, obviously when it comes to this type of testimony and these personal accounts, we always want to make sure that they carry forward. And that's part of why we're here today, because now this recording, this episode can be listened to by anybody, a week from now, a year from now, 10 years from now. Yeah. It's never going to be anywhere. I know that your family feels very passionate about Holocaust education as well. Of course, I've met your daughter, and she herself is interested in becoming involved in speaking and Holocaust education in general. So I'd love to know, in your words, in speaking to your family, to your kids and your grandkids, as you said, you went into your granddaughter's school. What is it like for you knowing that they have that interest and desire to carry the torch forward for decades to come?
It's absolutely extremely important. And I, as I've told you before, they know everything. They know they're very Holocaust-minded, if that's the thing to say. They are very interested that I'm doing that, and they have questions. But the same story that I've told here, I've pretty much told them. So they love it when I speak to them, and they love it when I speak to those children, and it's been a very nice experience. But I didn't do a lot of it. I say a half a dozen. That's it.
And that's still extremely important, because as we know, as we talk about here at the museum, it doesn't matter if you speak 1 time, 100 times, 1,000 times. It also doesn't matter if you're speaking to a group of 20 kids or 200 kids. All it matters is putting that message out there, and as long as you reach one person in the room, then your job is done, right?
We've reached the world.
Exactly.
Right.
So as we finish here, I would love for you to give some sort of message or final thoughts to anyone who's listening. What is your message to the future, to the world? Why do you feel that this work, what we're doing, this conversation right now, is so important?
Well, of course it's important. Not many people have heard what I have told, and it's gratifying that they were spreading the message. And I don't have any sophisticated to say, but it is important, of course, in my life, in my family's life, and everybody that I've met. I actually have a movie of my life, which was made by my Israeli cousin. He's a movie maker, and I have a movie maker that's not a home movie. It's a real movie of my life. Yeah. And I show it to everybody, and they want to see it all the time. And so that's very important.
Absolutely, because that's just another way that the story is captured and can last for years and from generation to generation. Yeah. That's why this is so important.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Joe, for being here today. I really, really appreciate your time. Hearing your testimony is a privilege, really. It's very special for me to be able to sit here and have this conversation with you. So thank you so much for being here.
Well, Zachary, I thank you. And I just want to tell you that I watch YouTube a lot. I don't know if you watch YouTube a lot, but they have these podcasts like this.
Yep.
And it's the first time I've done this kind of a podcast.
Well, I'm really glad that we were able to have this opportunity, and for you to have this, experience is really special, I know. And this episode, along with all of our others, will be up on YouTube very shortly. So to all of our listeners, thank you so much for joining us today for this really powerful episode. And you can look us up and find more episodes of HMTV at hmtcli.org.